Good evening. So, as many of you in this room will be aware, something very exciting is happening with the changing face of humanitarian action. Humanitarian action for a long time was based on in-kind mainly. And increasingly what we are seeing is the use of different cash-based responses. At a policy level, recently we've also had developments from the donor side, changing different previous limits to cash transfer programming. And recently, the United Nations Secretary General came out with his report, One Humanity Shared Responsibility, whereby for the World Humanitarian Summit coming up in a couple of weeks, he calls for cash to be the default response wherever markets and context allow. So that is really a change in terms of the way of doing business. The Overseas Development Institute did a high-level cash panel last year and looked at the evolution of cash transfer programming, which is something that the Cash Learning Partnership has also studied in the past. And what the study shows is that cash transfer programming has incrementally grown from about 2004, when we had a number of small pilots, to 2014, whereby we have about $1.2 billion worth of cash transfer programming. However, that still only represents about 6% of total humanitarian aid. So with all these advances going on that the three previous speakers presented, it makes you wonder, why is that? So a couple of years ago, CALP did a prospective study looking at the barriers of cash transfer programming, including strategic, technical, operational barriers. And in the midst of that, what we see is that the institutional mindset of individuals and systems within the humanitarian sector is really not fit for purpose. And cash, at the same time, presents an opportunity as well as a challenge to this system. So, in short, cash disrupts, and it requires new partnerships. It requires new ways of working together. It requires working with vendors in rural areas. It requires knowing, for a logistician, how to set up preferred supplier networks with mobile phones, with different banking system, etc. A very, very different skill set to what we traditionally thought of as being the classical humanitarian, or what we also call the superhero. So, where does this leave us? For the people, cash is largely a preferred response. We see here a number of different contexts whereby cash transfers are being used in different sectors. And we need to remember that the people that we are supposed to serve, they don't think in sectors. Even though sometimes when they see a certain organization, they say, I really need water, because they have very cleverly learned that that is what that organization is doing. But when affected by crisis and disasters, people all over the world, just like us, look at what is it that I need? What do I need for my family? And that may be different in different contexts and also in between different families. So, at CALP, obviously, working with cash, we do believe that cash is the future and that it has a very, very strong potential to change the way that we are doing things. And I would like just to bring up a couple of ways of change that we see sort of moving forward. In a couple of weeks' time, the world's leaders are going to come together in Istanbul. And whether or not you believe that this is a great moment of change, the fact is that everyone pretty much is going to be there. So in that time, what we would like to see from the CALP network is really to have a serious conversation about the way we currently do business and if that is the best for the people that we are supposed to serve. So as far as cash transfers are concerned, what that means is that cash is held at a very different analysis than in-kind response. I challenge any humanitarian in the room to tell me when you were last sleepless because of a lost bucket. But anyone who's worked with cash transfers, particularly in a volatile environment, knows what kind of questions that brings when you get a report in and saying, oh, you know, I think that something is not right here. So what we need to do as agents of change is not only to work within our organizations to change mindsets and attitudes, but also outwards to change the perception of cash, to change the public face of humanitarian action. So actually that the people in this country and in other countries in Europe think like, well, you know, cash, of course, cash is good. If something happened to me, wouldn't I rather would like to have the choice than being pre-prescribed how to be assisted in a crisis or an emergency. We also need to have a much better understanding of risk related to that. And we need to ask ourselves very seriously, is it risk for the beneficiaries that we are concerned about, which is what we humanitarians call them, or is it organizational risk? And is that really what we should be most preoccupied with? And very often we are quite good in projecting an understanding of risk on the people that we are supposed to be helping, and we don't always remember to ask, actually, how much at risk do you feel by using cash? People are rational human beings most of the time, so I would say that very few people in the world would say, yes, I would like cash when there is no markets and when they're going to be under threat to be using that cash transfer for their needs. So we need to talk to people. We need to put people at the center of the response. It's something that's coming up a lot now, particularly around the World Humanitarian Summit, probably almost as much as resilience. But by doing so, also people will tell us what they need. And they will tell us sometimes that cash is not the best response. We need also to think about who is best placed to be doing different areas of work within cash transfer programming and broadly within humanitarian aid. So you see here the members of the CALP network. Everyone has got different strengths and weaknesses. Does it really make sense to have 20 very similar NGOs doing more or less the similar things that actually a private sector actor could do better? And linked to that, we need to sort of reevaluate the role of partnership with the private sector. I know this is something that Tara will be speaking much more on in the second part. To quote one of the speakers in our event 2 weeks ago, we need to take off the horns of the private sector, not see them as the villain. Most importantly, I think, for the subject of this evening and the week that you're going into as the START network, is that we need to think very differently about collaboration and about working together. So I think one of the great joys of working with a network is that you can take off your agency hat and you can really think collectively about what the best solution is to bring about positive change. So I will leave you with those words and wish you a very good week and invite you to join the movement because cash is at least part of the future. Thank you very much.